Mr. Halloran was up front doing his best impression of enthusiasm about a case of Sevres porcelain. 26 sophomores were doing their best impression of listening. Theo Marsh counted both performances as qualified successes. Mr. Halloran had said significant 9 times in 14 minutes, which meant he remained committed. The class had produced only 3 visible yawns, 2 covert messages, and 1 attempt by Julian Perez to photograph his own reflection in an 18th century soup tureen. By the standards of a Friday field trip, civilization held. "The blue," Mr. Halloran said, leaning toward the glass as if the cup had confided in him, was extraordinarily difficult to achieve. Priya tipped her phone toward Theo. On the screen, beneath a photograph of the cup, she had typed, "W must defend the blue at all costs." Theo looked at her. She had managed to keep her face solemn, which was why the joke worked. Mr. Halloran moved on to a pair of porcelain shepherdesses, whose continued survival through several revolutions seemed less remarkable than their skirts. The group followed in a slow contraction and expansion, backpacks touching, separating, touching again. School shoes squeaked against the polished floor. A museum guard looked up each time, and then remembered that this was his profession now. Theo stayed at the edge of the group. He usually did. The center required an ongoing negotiation over elbows, eye contact, and who was supposed to laugh when, whereas the edge asked only that he keep pace. It also allowed him to see the other rooms. The Whitcombe Museum of Antiquities occupied a square stone building in Denver that looked older from the street than it could possibly have been. Inside, it had arranged several thousand years of human achievement into a route beginning with chipstone and ending, according to the map, at a gift shop selling pencils shaped like columns. The school had been there for 53 minutes. Mr. Halloran had promised them the bus would leave at 2, whether or not everyone had finished learning from the past. At 11:27, as the class drifted from porcelain toward a display of silver snuff boxes, Theo noticed an archway across the gallery. The lettering above it read, "Kenchinals, Europope, 1700-1800. There was nothing remarkable about the arch itself. It was plaster, painted the same patient cream as the other walls, with a brass strip set into the floor beneath it. The room beyond was not dark. It was lower lit, which was different. A person could still make out the first display case, the brass corners on its glass, and behind it a torn rectangle of tapestry mounted against blue-black cloth. 2 visitors passed the archway without turning their heads. A woman in a red coat adjusted the strap of her bag as she crossed in front of it. A man carrying an audio guide paused beside the sign for decorative arts, frowned at his device, and walked the other way. Nobody avoided the gallery. Avoidance would have required noticing it. "Theo," Priya said. He looked back. She had tucked her phone into her palm. "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The pre-wandering." "I haven't gone anywhere." "Exactly. You stand there first like your body has filed an application without telling you." He checked his position. He had fallen 4 paces behind the group. "Mr. Halloran said the bus leaves at 2, Priya said. "He has said that 5 times. Then it must be significant." She moved after the others, still smiling. Theo meant to follow. The tapestry fragment held his attention instead. From where he stood, it looked as though the surviving image contained 4 people, perhaps 5. One figure knelt. Another raised both hands, though whether in blessing or refusal was impossible to tell because the upper portion had been torn away. The wool had faded unevenly rust-red, blue-black, the yellowed white of old bone. A vertical rip passed through the center of the scene and removed whatever the figures had once faced. Theo tried to decide whether the tear had happened before the tapestry was mounted, or because of it. The museum label would say. Labels always preferred the kind of question they could answer. Mr. Halloran's voice receded toward the next room. Theo took 1 step toward the archway, then another. The brass strip crossed beneath his shoes on the 3rd. He stopped. That was irritating. Not frightening. Frightening would have been melodramatic, and there was nothing inherently alarming about walking into the part of a museum the signs had directed him toward. Still, he preferred his decisions to occur before his feet carried them out. Behind him, someone laughed at something Mr. Halloran had not intended as a joke. The class continued without him. Theo looked back once. Priya was visible between 2 taller students, her dark ponytail moving as she turned toward the next case. She did not look around again. The gallery waited in the entirely ordinary manner of a room, with no visitors in it. Theo went inside. The room past the room was smaller than it had appeared from the public gallery. There were 6 cases, 1 wall cabinet, 3 portraits, and the tapestry fragment. Theo counted twice, because a narrow glass panel beside the cabinet might have been a case or part of the wall. A silver-hilted sword lay alone on green felt. A painted fan occupied a case large enough for armor. Nothing was crowded, yet the room resisted being taken in at once. The air was cooler. Thick walls, Theo decided. A clock ticked somewhere beyond the archway, audible but unseen. He bent to read the tapestry label. Fragment of an allegorical hanging. Central your hope, Orly Sixten, Centra. Wool and Sixten, Turi. Wool and silk. Macker and Thenwer. What do you see? A man asked. Theo straightened. The man stood near the cabinet, though Theo had not noticed him enter. He was old without seeming frail, white-haired, dressed in charcoal wool with a waistcoat. His museum badge read, Cor Nellis Webb, Docent. The damage, Theo said. Rather than the picture is mostly damaged now. Webb waited. Silence seemed to cost him nothing. There are 4 figures, Theo said. Maybe 5. 1 kneeling, 2 standing. The one on the left might have a staff, except it could be a spear. The center is missing. And what are they doing? I don't know. A commendable answer in a museum. You asked what I saw. I did. Most people answer with what they believe they ought to see. Theo looked again. The kneeling figure's face had been worn smooth. Behind it, another figure reached forward with one open hand. Mercy, perhaps, or taking. Is it religious? Theo asked. Almost everything becomes religious if it survives long enough. That isn't an answer? No. It is a reason to distrust easy ones. Theo glanced toward the arch. He should leave. Webb did not ask where his group was. Some accounts make the old arrangement sound more stable than it was, Webb said. The old arrangement of what? Europe. That seems broad? It was. That was among its problems. Theo indicated the label. This is 16th century. The cloth is. Why are you talking about the 18th? Webb studied him with patient gray eyes. What happens when someone inherits a structure built to outlast her? It outlasts her. Sometimes. Webb turned toward the tapestry. In October of 1740, a young woman in Vienna had reason to wonder the same. In October of 1740, Vienna had already begun measuring black cloth. No order had been given. The emperor still breathed in the rooms overlooking the inner court, and every physician permitted near him continued to speak of strength, rest, and the benefits of another quiet night. Yet bolts of mourning fabric had appeared in the Hofburg storerooms. A tailor Maria Theresa knew by sight was summoned before dawn and dismissed before breakfast. Servants removed bright flowers from 2 receiving rooms and could not agree, when challenged, on who had told them to do it. The palace prepared itself while insisting there was no need. Maria Theresa crossed the antechamber outside her father's apartments at 7:30 in the morning. She knew the time because the clock on the mantel had been wound incorrectly and lost 4 minutes each day. No one else seemed to have noticed. The air held the medicinal heat of rooms kept too warm for an ill man. Beeswax, vinegar, damp wool, and the bitter residue of whatever the physicians had boiled most recently. The windows had filmed at the corners. A footman opened one door for her, then another, each movement careful enough to resemble prayer. Men rose as she passed. Some did so at once. Others finished the sentence they were speaking first. She noticed those. There were 12 in the outer room, household officers, secretaries, 2 members of the council, a military clerk whose boots had not been cleaned, and Bartenstein with a packet of papers beneath one arm. The packet had been tied and untied so often that the red ribbon had gone soft. Your Royal Highness, he said. The title was correct and insufficient. Every title available to her was correct and insufficient. How is the night? She asked. Bartenstein's eyes moved once toward the closed bedchamber door. His Imperial Majesty slept for a time. How long? I was not in the room. Then who was? He named the chamberlain and the senior physician. Maria Theresa turned to the nearest secretary. Find them. I want the hours, not the language suitable for a dispatch. The secretary bowed and went. It was a small cruelty to require precision from men who had built their usefulness on avoiding it. She had discovered that cruelty was sometimes only accuracy arriving unwelcome. Bartenstein shifted the packet beneath his arm. There are letters. There are always letters. These require your attention. They required my father's. His expression did not alter, but the outer room seemed to. Nothing moved. Nevertheless, each man found a reason to look at a door, a paper, another man's sleeve. Her father's illness had made every ordinary sentence dangerous. One could stumble into the future by choosing the wrong tense. Maria held out her hand. The packet contained copies of replies to Vienna's most recent requests for renewed assurances under the pragmatic sanction. The word sanction had always sounded firmer than the thing itself. For 27 years, her father had treated Europe as a table at which enough seals, signatures, marriages, gifts, payments, concessions, and injured vanities might be arranged into permanence. Kingdoms that objected to a woman inheriting the Habsburg lands had been persuaded, compensated, or exhausted. Courts had recognized the settlement. Diets had accepted it. Princes had sworn. Ambassadors had reported satisfaction. The papers in Maria's hands proved that men could promise the same fact in 9 different languages. They did not prove they would prefer the promise to an army. She read standing because sitting would have encouraged the others to settle around her. Great Britain's language remained favorable, though crowded with qualifications. The Dutch reply expressed friendship and concern. Saxony's was courteous enough to be insolent. Bavaria had answered a different question than the one Vienna had asked. The Prussian court had not refused recognition. It had merely delayed saying what it recognized. Nothing from Berlin, she asked. A note from the envoy, Bartenstein said. No formal reply. Frederick has been king 5 months. Yes, your Royal Highness. And in 5 months has he lost the use of a pen? One of the councillors made a sound that might have been a cough. Bartenstein did not smile. The new king has altered several arrangements at court, he said. There is some confusion. There is never confusion at a court when delay is useful. She gave the Prussian paper back. The edge had roughened from handling and caught against the pad of her thumb. What of the treasury? The councillor responsible for answering took half a step forward. He had a broad, serious face and a gift for presenting bad figures as if they were weather experienced by another province. Receipts for the quarter are not complete. What is complete? The anticipated receipts. I did not ask what we anticipate receiving. He paused. Maria watched him calculate which truth would injure him least. The ready funds are limited. To what amount? He named it. She made him repeat it. The number was worse the second time, perhaps because everyone had heard it clearly. And the army? This answer came from the military clerk, though a councillor attempted to intercept it. Regiments existed on paper in greater strength than they existed in boots. Men had not been paid. Horses had been requisitioned and never delivered. Fortifications required repair. Magazines contained flour, powder, and promises in uncertain proportions. Maria asked how many troops could be assembled within a fortnight. The clerk looked at the councillor. The councillor looked at Bartenstein. Bartenstein looked at Maria. How many? She asked again. The clerk gave a figure, then amended it downward. Which is the true number? The second, your Royal Highness. Then why did you give me the first? It is the established strength. It is ink. No one contradicted her. Beyond the bedchamber door something fell. Not heavily, metal against wood, followed by the quick movements of attendants trying to make haste sound orderly. Maria's hand closed on the papers before she knew it had done so. The men in the antechamber became very still. Her father had been emperor for nearly 30 years. He had been Archduke of Austria, King of Hungary, King of Bohemia, and ruler of territories whose names could occupy the first page of a treaty before the treaty reached its subject. He had spent much of his reign persuading Europe to accept that all of this, lands, crowns, debts, jurisdictions, quarrels inherited from the dead, might pass to his daughter. He had not persuaded the laws of the empire to make her emperor. That title was elective and male. The distinction had been explained to her many times, usually by men who believed repetition could make an absurdity dignified. She might inherit the hereditary lands, she might govern them. She might supply the armies, revenues, marriages, and policy by which the house remained powerful. But the imperial crown would require another head, her husband's, if the electors could be brought to it. The question had occupied rooms adjacent to her life for years. Mainz, Trier, Cologne, Bohemia, Bavaria, Saxony, Brandenburg, the Palatinate, Hanover, 9 votes, none given by affection, and few given only once. Bohemia's vote belonged to the crown she was meant to inherit, though whether men would allow her to exercise it in an election designed to exclude her sex had already generated opinions longer than some campaigns. Brandenburg belonged to the young Prussian king. Saxony and Bavaria had reasons to consider themselves. The ecclesiastical electors possessed principles, relations, debts, and neighboring armies in varying proportions. Her father's plan had been to preserve the house by separating what could not legally be joined in her person. She would rule the lands. Francis would seek the imperial crown. Their marriage would persuade Europe to regard two arrangements as one continuity. On paper, it had a satisfying neatness. Maria had learned to distrust political plans that became neater when drawn farther from the people required to carry them out. Francis had been born Duke of Lorraine and had surrendered that duchy, so France would accept their marriage settlement. He now held Tuscany, a compensation rich in titles and poor in resemblance to home. Several electors considered him too French. Others considered him insufficiently French. Some disliked Lorraine, some Tuscany, some Vienna, and some merely preferred to be paid for overcoming objections they had not possessed until asked. If the imperial title left the Habsburg house, every rival would describe the change as temporary while arranging for it to become permanent. Francis entered the outer room without announcement. He had never acquired the Hofburg's instinct for making every arrival ceremonial, and Maria was grateful for it. His coat had been fastened incorrectly at the throat. He looked as though he had dressed in the dark and refused assistance afterward. He came directly to her. "You have not eaten," he said. 12 men discovered sudden interest in the walls. "I have been here 20 minutes. You did not eat before you came. That is a separate accusation. It is the same breakfast." He lowered his voice, though not enough to make the concern private. His hand touched her elbow and remained there for only a moment. She loved him for not attempting to lead her away. "How is he?" Francis asked. "Sleeping for a time." His face changed enough that Maria knew he understood. The men behind them had gone still. Maria gave him the replies. Francis read the first lines more slowly than she had. His political instincts were better than hostile observers allowed and less reliable than affection wished. He could see insult. He did not always see the hour at which insult became action. "They will recognize you," he said. "Some already have. All who matter. Everyone matters when he owns soldiers." Francis looked toward Bartenstein. "And those who do not? They will discover a cousin, a clause, or an injured principle," Maria said. "Possibly all three." The packet included pedigrees prepared years before, lines drawn between houses across generations of marriages, Bavarian claims, Saxon claims, arguments regarding Bohemia, Austria, the succession of women, the succession through women, and rights that had slept so long they had acquired the authority of age. The documents had been assembled to defeat those claims. Their existence also made the claims easier to find. Her inheritance was often spoken of as though it were one thing, a jewel in a box waiting to be lifted whole. It was not. It was the Archduchy of Austria and the Kingdom of Hungary and the Crown of Bohemia. It was Styria, Carinthia, Carniola, the Tyrol, lands in Italy and the Netherlands, distant offices, local liberties, toll rights, debts, diets, estates, exemptions, and old wounds recorded in newer language. Each territory recognized the house according to its own laws. Each expected those laws to survive recognition. Some owed troops, some owed money, some explained, in documents of impressive length, why they owed neither at present. The arrangement held because the same dynasty stood at its center, and because everyone with reason to pull it apart had, until now, found greater profit in leaving it whole. Her father lay behind one door, and already men were calculating again. A physician emerged. He closed the door with both hands, as though afraid the latch might report him. Maria knew before he spoke that the night had not been good. She also knew that 12 men were watching to learn how knowledge entered her face. "Your Royal Highness," the physician said. "His Imperial Majesty is awake. May I see him?" "For a few minutes." He began to add a caution. Maria passed him before he finished. The bedchamber had been made dim despite the morning. Heavy curtains covered most of the windows, candles burned in shaded holders, their wax bent from the heat. Charles lay propped against pillows, reduced in ways Maria refused to catalogue. His hands had always seemed too large for court papers. Now the coverlet made ridges over the bones. Her mother sat beside him with a rosary wound around one hand. She looked at Maria and then away, granting her the courtesy of not arranging her expression. Maria approached the bed. Her father's eyes opened. For several breaths they did not settle, then they found her. "Reezy," he said. The name belonged to rooms without counselors in them. "I am here." He moved one hand. Maria took it. His skin was hot and dry, the fingers weaker than the effort with which they closed around hers. "Bardenstein?" he asked. "Outside. The papers. I have them." He seemed relieved, which angered her so sharply that she had to look down at their hands. He had spent half her life building those papers around her. Now he meant to die and leave her inside them. "England," he said. "Still favorable. The Dutch." "Concerned." That might have been amusement in his face. It vanished before she could be sure. "Prussia?" No answer. His fingers tightened. The effort cost him. "Watch him." "Frederick?" Charles closed his eyes. She waited, but no further answer came. The room seemed filled by the soft mechanical sounds of illness, breath, cloth, the faint click of prayer beads. Maria's mother bowed her head. There were things a daughter might say. There were things an heir might ask. The two lists had almost nothing in common. Maria leaned closer. "The treasury is lower than I was told." Her mother looked up. The physician, standing near the curtain, went motionless. Charles opened his eyes again. "The army is below its established strength," Maria said. "I have asked for numbers that refer to men rather than ink." We have no reply from Berlin. Bavaria and Saxony are preserving their options. "I will require the councils this afternoon." For one instant, illness withdrew far enough that she recognized the man who had argued with Europe for 3 decades. "Yes," he said. Not blessing, not apology, recognition. His hand loosened in hers. Maria remained until the physician touched her sleeve. She left without remembering the distance from the bed to the door. In the antechamber, the men rose again. This time, every one of them did so at once. She returned the packet to Bartenstein. "Have copies made of the Prussian reports? Send for the council at 2. The treasury figures are to be revised before then, and the army strength is to be given by regiment with present location, arrears, and usable horses." The councillor began, "Your Royal Highness, in the present circumstances. These are the present circumstances." He bowed. "Also," she said, "stop measuring mourning cloth in corridors where my father's servants can see it." No one admitted that this had occurred. By noon, the tailor was gone. Maria went to hear Mass. She ate half a roll because Francis placed it in her hand and waited. She received 2 ambassadors who spoke of health, continuity, and the enduring friendship of their sovereigns. She thanked them without requiring either man to say what would endure if the emperor did not. The palace carried the day forward through habit. Doors opened, meals appeared, papers accumulated in precise stacks. In the court chapel, prayers rose for a recovery. No one arranging the afternoon believed would come. Toward evening, Maria stood at a window overlooking the inner court. Rain had begun, fine enough that the paving stones darkened without showing drops. Couriers crossed below with capes over their dispatch cases. The child within her shifted, or perhaps it was only the strain of standing. She placed one hand against the front of her gown until the sensation passed. Francis came to stand beside her. "You frightened the Treasury Council," he said. "They frightened me first. You conceal it better. That is not the same as lacking cause." He rested his forearms on the stone sill. For a while neither spoke. "Your father built this for you," he said at last. Maria watched a groom lead 2 wet horses under the arcade. "He built recognition. That is not nothing. No." She had no wish to be unjust, least of all now. "It is also not an army." Francis turned toward her. "You will have one. With what money? We will find it. And if the estates decline, then you will persuade them. And if the princes do not recognize me, then they are fools. Fools own soldiers, too." He sighed. "You have said. I expect I shall have to say it again." The private smile he gave her was tired and real. She allowed herself one in return. A chamberlain appeared at the far end of the room. He did not hurry. Men at court were taught from youth to carry catastrophe at a measured pace. Maria watched him approach and knew. He bowed deeply. "Your Royal Highness." Behind him, somewhere within the emperor's apartments, a bell began to sound. The first stroke was not loud. It did not need to be. Doors opened along the corridor. Servants emerged, then stopped. A secretary dropped a sheet of paper and left it where it fell. The second stroke came while the chamberlain was still speaking. Maria heard the words, His Imperial Majesty and God's mercy, and understood that language was arranging itself around a fact already complete. Her father was dead. For several moments grief had no form she could use. It was not tears, though they would come. It was not disbelief. She had believed this since morning, and refused it since childhood. It was an absence placed exactly where the world had kept its center. Francis took her hand. Beyond the windows, the couriers continued across the court. One mounted, another dismounted. Rain silvered the shoulders of both horses. The bell sounded again. Every person in the corridor changed direction at once. The court wore black before the city had finished asking whether the emperor was truly dead. Cloth covered the bright hangings. Silver was removed from tables and replaced with objects whose principal virtue was that they reflected less light. Bells announced the death of Vienna in measured intervals, and churches answered until the sound ceased to belong to any single tower. The Hofburg filled with the business of mourning, heralds, clergy, tailors, guards, secretaries, and men who had been waiting years to discover which door would open when Charles VI closed. Maria Theresa was proclaimed sovereign of the Habsburg hereditary lands. The words were spoken correctly. Their correctness did not make the lands arrive obediently beneath her feet. The first difficulty concerned a seal. An order intended for the Austrian administration had been prepared in her father's name before his death and now required issuing in hers. The old matrix could not be used. The new one had not been cut. A secretary brought 3 proposed formulas for her titles, each complete enough to begin a quarrel. One placed Hungary before Bohemia. Another preserved the order used in her father's instruments, though it included dignities she did not hold. The third avoided the imperial language and thereby announced its absence more clearly than any enemy could have done. Which formula permits the order to be obeyed today? Maria asked. The secretary explained that obedience was not the difficulty, regularity was. Regularity for whom? For every office receiving an instrument under your majesty's authority. And if the instrument is delayed, he looked down at the papers. The order concerned grain from a crown storehouse. Delay meant a regiment would wait. Maria chose the least objectionable formula, signed beneath it, and ordered a temporary seal struck before nightfall. Bartenstein advised that later instruments might require correction. Then later men may correct them after today's soldiers have eaten. The secretary carried the order away with the careful expression of someone transporting both food and precedent. By evening, wax-bearing Maria's authority had begun moving through offices that had spent years preparing for her succession, and still found themselves surprised by the need to write her name. The temporary impression was shallow. One edge of the shield failed to take cleanly, and the crown above it blurred into the surrounding wax. Maria examined the first copy before allowing it to leave. A clerk apologized and proposed waiting for a better matrix. She pressed her thumb beside the flawed device, testing whether the wax had cooled. "Can it be recognized?" she asked. "Yes, your majesty." "Then send it." For the first week of her reign, orders traveled beneath an imperfect seal. No province mistook whose order it was. She received condolences in a chamber hung with black velvet. The fabric absorbed candlelight and gave nothing back. At 23, carrying another child beneath her mourning gown, she stood beneath the portraits of men who had inherited, without requiring Europe to make a special legal case for their sex. The first ambassador bowed low enough, the second bowed lower. Both brought letters praising her father's wisdom and expressing confidence in the peace of the continent. Neither letter contained troops. She learned to hear the spaces between courteous phrases. Continued regard meant a court had not yet chosen against her. Respect for established rights meant someone was reading old genealogies. Desire for tranquility meant no assistance would be given until tranquility had already been secured by other means. Formal recognition arrived from several quarters. It came sealed, ribboned, and written on excellent paper. Each document was placed in its proper file. Bartenstein treated the files as fortifications. Maria treated them as paper. On the third morning after her father's death, she entered the council room before half the council had assembled. A map of the hereditary lands lay across the long table, weighted at the corners by 2 inkstands, a brass rule, and a volume of imperial capitulations thick enough to stop a pistol ball. Wet boot prints marked the parquet near the door. Couriers had been coming through the night. Maria removed her gloves and placed them beside the map. "Begin with Hungary," she said. A minister explained that the Hungarian Diet would require careful management. The crown of St. Stephen brought obligations unlike those of the Austrian lands. The estates guarded their privileges. Levies could not be assumed. Subsidies required negotiation. How long? Maria asked. Your Majesty, it is difficult to say. The title had changed after her accession to the hereditary crowns. She noticed that some men spoke it easily and others handled it like a cup they feared dropping. How long to summon the Diet? He gave an estimate. How long before money follows? A longer estimate. And troops? Longer still? Then we begin today. The minister looked as though he had hoped history might wait for procedure to catch up. They moved to Bohemia, then Austria, then the Italian possessions, the Netherlands, the frontier districts, the magazines, arrears, contracts, customs receipts, and loans already promised against revenues not yet collected. Maria asked who commanded each regiment and whether he was with it. She asked which fortresses had powder that had been inspected rather than merely entered into a ledger. She asked how many cavalry horses were sound. When a minister answered with established strength, she asked for present strength. When he answered with present strength, she asked how many could march. The figures diminished under questioning. By noon, the army had lost several thousand men without anyone leaving the room. Francis attended, but did not sit at the head of the table. Some counselors looked toward him when Maria pressed too hard. By the end of the morning, he no longer intervened. Bardenstein opened another dispatch. From Dresden, he said, Saxony had not rejected the succession. Saxony merely wished to preserve every right arising from the marriage of an earlier archduchess several generations before. The Elector of Saxony was also King of Poland, which allowed one man to be addressed with enough magnificence to obscure how many claims he was considering. And Munich? Maria asked. The Bavarian court had grown more explicit. Charles Albert's marriage into the Habsburg line supplied him with arguments. Arguments supplied appetite with clothing. Does he claim all? She asked. Not in the present communication. Which part does he omit? No one answered immediately. Maria looked down at the map. Men had colored borders as though borders were facts of nature. In truth, they were agreements maintained by habit, force, memory, and the inconvenience of changing them. Her father's death had removed one inconvenience. A secretary entered carrying a narrow packet darkened by rain. He went first to Bartenstein, who read the superscription and gave it directly to Maria. The report came from the north. Prussian troops were concentrating in districts near the Silesian frontier. Units had received orders. Roads were being surveyed. Supply arrangements had changed. The language remained cautious. No hostile declaration had been made. No border crossed. The movements might be precautionary. The new king might wish only to demonstrate readiness amid uncertain succession. Might, Maria said. The military counselor leaned over the map. Prussia has reasons to be watchful. Of whom? Bavaria, Saxony, France, perhaps. The general uncertainty. So he assembles troops beside my province. Silesia is near his own lands. Maria placed one finger on Berlin, then on the Silesian border. Many places are near his lands. He has chosen this one. Bartenstein said, Frederick may intend leverage rather than war. Leverage for what? No one knew. Or several knew and preferred not to be first. There had been old Hohenzollern claims to parts of Silesia, buried beneath settlements and counterclaims. The province was rich, cloth, mines, towns, tax revenues, roads. It also projected between Prussian territories in a way that offended the eye of a ruler who liked maps to resemble conclusions. Maria had never met Frederick. She knew him through reports written by men who distrusted either his father, his music, his French books, or the speed with which he had begun altering Prussian policy after taking the crown. He was 28. He had inherited a disciplined army and a treasury unlike hers. Court gossip called him clever. Court gossip often used clever when it meant dangerous but entertaining at dinner. What has our envoy asked? She said, for clarification. And the answer? None yet. Ask again. A minister shifted. Too direct an inquiry could suggest alarm. I am alarmed. The word moved around the table. Maria led it. I do not propose to announce it from the cathedral, she said. I propose to learn whether an army is moving towards Silesia. We must avoid provoking him. If a question provokes 20,000 men, the men were already prepared. The military counselor objected to the number. Maria asked for his own. He had none. Then obtain one. She ordered discreet inquiries, faster musters in the nearest commands, examination of the roads, and updated reports from fortresses. Nothing that could be called mobilization by an unfriendly ambassador. Everything that could reduce the advantage of surprise by one day, perhaps two. Before the secretary could gather the orders, another courier was admitted. He had ridden through the night from a posting road north of Olmütz, and carried the journey visibly, dried mud to his knees, a split seam beneath one arm, wax from the dispatch seal pressed into the skin of his thumb. He remained standing until Maria told him twice to sit. His packet contained no declaration and no certainty. Merchants had seen Prussian wagons moving south. Horses were being purchased in unusual numbers. A local official had counted artillery teams on a road not ordinarily used for review. The reports disagreed over units and direction. They agreed that the movement was organized. "How many guns?" Maria asked. The courier named one estimate, then admitted the observer had counted wheels rather than pieces. "How many wagons?" He knew that number. "What did they carry?" "Flour, by the markings. Powder in some." "The rest were covered, your majesty. A minister said that armies move supplies in autumn for winter quarters." Another noted that Frederick's father had kept Prussia in a permanent condition of readiness. Both statements were true. Neither made the wagons travel elsewhere. Maria asked the courier which part of his report he trusted. He hesitated, then said, "The road, your majesty. Men may mistake a regiment. They do not mistake what heavy wheels have done to a road." That answer she believed. She ordered copies sent to the commanders nearest Silesia, with instructions to report road conditions of their own. She dictated letters to London and The Hague while the councillors listened. No plea, no accusation, only the fact of unexplained concentration and a request that friendly courts seek clarification. To Berlin she sent courtesy sharpened to a point. Vienna had heard of movements that must surely have an innocent purpose. Her Majesty would value the King of Prussia's own account of them. It was not enough. She knew it as she gave the orders. But government was often the art of making insufficient acts before sufficient ones became possible. The council broke after 3. Men rose with papers stacked against their chests. Chairs scraped the floor. Several spoke quietly among themselves before reaching the door, already converting instruction into delay, procedure, and the protection of their own offices. Maria remained beside the map. Francis waited until the room had emptied. "You said you would not announce fear," he said. "I announced it to men paid to make use of it. Some of them looked ready to faint. Then they may do so after sending the orders." He came around the table. The map between them showed her inheritance in separate colors, as though a patient hand had assembled it from fragments in expected gratitude. "You have not slept," Francis said. "I slept. For how long? That is an exact question, and I dislike it." He touched the back of her hand. "Your father has been dead 3 days. Yes, you are permitted grief. I have not forbidden it. You have scheduled it poorly." Maria looked at him. Tenderness offered at the wrong angle felt like restraint. Francis had made that mistake before. He withdrew his hand, but not his attention. She said, "When the letters are answered, more will come. When the regiments are counted, they will require counting again. When I know what Frederick wants." Francis glanced down at Silesia. "He may want nothing. He is a king. That does not prove appetite. It establishes opportunity." Francis gave a tired breath that might once have been laughter. "You have become severe in 3 days." "No. People have become honest in my presence." That silenced him. Maria regretted the cruelty as soon as it landed. Francis had surrendered the reign under the arrangements that made their marriage acceptable to Europe, and received Tuscany in compensation after the last Medici died. He understood what maps cost, though not always in the same manner she did. His losses had been negotiated while the world watched. Hers were being proposed in rooms from which no one had yet sent an invitation. "I am sorry," she said. He shook his head. "Do not be. Only remember that I am in the room too." She did. A servant brought soup neither of them had requested. Maria ate enough to stop Francis watching the spoon. Afterward, she received another courier, then another. Condolences from Turin. Assurance from London. A careful note from Versailles. No formal answer from Berlin. Late in the afternoon her mother sent for her. The Dowager Empress had moved from the Emperor's rooms, but not far. The rosary remained in her hand. On the table beside her lay a list of funeral observances written in a secretary's immaculate script. You are pale, her mother said. So is everyone. The rooms are black. This is not a time for wit. It was not wit. Her mother studied her, then indicated the chair opposite. Maria sat. For a while they spoke of the funeral, the lying in state, the churches, the formal dress, the order of precedence that could convert bereavement into a dispute over who walked before whom. Maria answered where she could. Where she could not, her mother supplied certainty with the authority of habit. At last the Dowager Empress said, "Your father believed the settlement would hold." Maria looked at the list rather than at her. He believed he had made it expensive to break. He gave his life to it. He gave his reign. The correction was too quick. Maria pressed her lips together. Her mother's fingers moved once along the beads. You are angry with him. He is dead. That was not my question. Maria looked toward the shuttered window. Candlelight reflected faintly in the black cloth covering the wall beyond. He knew what condition the army was in, she said. He knew the treasury. He knew every promise rested on men who would profit by forgetting it. And still he left me papers. He left you a right. A right is what one calls power before testing it. Her mother flinched. Not visibly enough for anyone less practiced in the room. Maria saw it and hated herself for seeing. He loved you, the Dowager Empress said. Maria's anger broke around that simple fact, not because it was false, but because it was true. Her father had loved her. He had bent Europe toward her inheritance by years of effort. He had also left the army neglected, the finances strained, and the settlement dependent upon courtesy from rulers whose courtesy would expire with him. Love and failure occupied the same rooms. Grief did not require her to evict either. I know, she said. Her mother reached across the table. Maria took her hand. They sat until the next bell began. When Maria returned to the council chamber after dusk, no counselors remained. Lamps burned low along the walls. Someone had gathered the scattered papers into stacks and left the map spread beneath its weights. She approached it alone. Vienna lay near the center. Hungary extended broad and difficult to the east. Bohemia rose northward. Silesia curved along the frontier in a shape neither defensible nor disposable. The inkstand at the map's upper edge cast a shadow across part of Prussia. Maria moved it aside. Reports did not yet describe an invasion. Ambassadors had not broken relations. Frederick had made no demand. The old order had not collapsed. Every court continued to speak as though recognition, inheritance, and peace were settled matters. That was the courtesy of recognition. The world behaved as though a structure remained whole until the hour it discovered advantage in the crack. She placed her hand flat on the map. Silesia lay close enough to touch with one hand. Then what? Theo asked. Then someone crossed a border, Webb said. That seems like the part you were supposed to get to. She spent longer reaching it. Theo looked at the tapestry. The rust-colored wool in the kneeling figure's robe caught the light. How much happened exactly like that? Charles VI died on the 20th of October. His daughter inherited what the law and several dozen promises allowed. The treasury was poor, the army weaker than its lists, and Prussian troops were moving. You invented the soup. I consider soup historically defensible. There you are, Priya said from the archway. She held Theo's backpack by one strap. Mr. Halloran is doing head counts like a man being audited. You are the discrepancy. Only 12 minutes had passed. Theo disliked the number. Priya glanced at Webb's badge. Private tour? Only the beginning, Webb said. She handed Theo the backpack. Bus at 2. That makes 7 reminders, because you missed one while inheriting Europe. Theo turned to Webb. Do you tell this to everyone? How many people came through the arch with you? None. If you want the rest, I am usually here Wednesdays and Fridays. Priya called him again. Theo stepped into the brighter gallery. Mr. Halloran received him with the controlled relief of a man whose authority had briefly become arithmetic. At 1:53, the class filed onto the bus. Priya took the window seat and moved over for him. Tomorrow, she said. 3:42 bus, then dumplings. That's Fridays. Tomorrow is Friday. Theo checked. She was right. The bus pulled away. Sunlight turned the museum doors into a pale mirror hiding the archway. Theo pictured the tapestry anyway. Rust, blue-black, bone. One figure kneeling before a missing center. The Whitcombe closed at 5, school ended at 3:15. From the stop outside the school, 4 buses would bring him back before closing.